Hello there, and welcome to episode 5 of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. After the storm of chapters we treated you to last week, we are heading for an even longer episode this week, with the chapters Into the Wildwood, The Red Circle, and Driven to Ruin. I guess for Ludlov the days of silent research and hanging around Hübschdorf are finally over, and he's headed for real adventure and peril. This version of the story is complete, but it's the standard edition. If you want a version that is about an hour longer without any intros or outros, just the download, you might want to check out our page on Bandcamp or our Patreon community. If you're not ready for that, you can always join us on Patreon for free, or for a mere $1 a month, which will support our channel, and you will get exclusive access to posts for paid members. That's $12 a year, which could buy our oldest son, who turned 9 last week, a Lego keychain. He's just so obsessed with Legos, especially the sets from The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Even if you can't spend any money at the moment, we are really grateful for the likes and comments, for subscribing, for your reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, and your wonderful encouragement and shares on YouTube, Podbean and social media. And of course, we thank you so much just for listening and joining us on yet another epic audio journey. What's that? Shut up, Domine. Oh, okay. You've probably got your mug or glass and your blanket with you now, so I'll just shut up and you can join Ludlov on his new adventure in the Hounds of Hübschdorf, episode 5. Into the Wildwood. Although there was enough daylight to see by, the leaden grey sky was barely visible, only patches of it emerging beyond the brown and red canopy above. The straight, wide trunks of beech and ash trees reminded Ludlov of the columns of the grand cathedral in Seven Peaks, the mist casting a veil of wonder and mystery reminiscent of sacred incense. Perhaps the Wildwood could indeed be seen as a sort of cathedral itself, he thought, a testament to the creative will of the goddess. Like the architectural marvel of Yvenendale's capital, it welcomed any and all without distinction, regardless of the state of their soul. But unlike the cathedral, it would not cast out the obstinate heretic, the unbeliever, the witch, or even the demon. The Wildwood truly was indifferent and uncaring, a willing refuge to saints and sinners alike, even the vilest of all. Lost in thought, Ludlov suddenly stumbled upon the roots of an ancient tree and almost lost his balance. Shortly after, he barely avoided stepping into a large hole dug by some animal, and quickly made a resolution to be more careful. The ground was invisible in this hateful mist, and there were obstacles everywhere. He had to admit he felt embarrassed for his clumsiness in the presence of the young initiate who had praised his greatness barely an hour ago. He cast a quick glance behind him and was relieved to see that Tolfmann hadn't noticed any of it. Ludlov was also grateful for the backpack Garner had given him, which provided more room for food and tools than his old satchel. A rolled-up deerskin tied to its underside would provide protection against the night cold, although Ludlov had to admit to himself that he hadn't quite adjusted to the extra weight of the backpack and the dangling lantern attached to it just yet. As they continued their trek into the Wildwood, the mist slowly began to dissipate, but the terrain only became more difficult to navigate. There were hills and dells and great rocks and boulders, as well as thick, twisting tree roots to overcome, and it was all covered in layers of brown and orange leaves. On the other hand, there was so much more room between the trees now that nothing blocked their view of the milky white sky above. Ludlov couldn't help but enjoy the colorful autumn smells as he tried to march on to protect himself from the intruding cold. By noon, they found themselves climbing a hill from which a massive rock jutted out, facing southward, at least 15 paces high. Tired and hungry, Ludlov and Tolfmann decided to sit down there and take out some of their provisions. It was chillier than Ludlov had anticipated, and dark clouds were gathering above their heads. He looked for his gloves in his backpack, but couldn't find them. Then he remembered he'd last seen them in the Hübschdorf stables, where he must have left them. Once more, he found himself annoyed at his own absent-mindedness. The woods stretched out before their eyes in a splendorous symphony of warm autumn colors, from the red and copper of oak and beech to the golden yellow of birch and ash. Here and there, the warm hues were interrupted by the deep, dark green of an occasional pine. From this vantage point, the travelers had a clear overview of the distance they had already covered. They could easily make out Hübschdorf, nestled somewhere to the south, smoke rising from its chimneys in thin grey lines. "The village looks so small from here, doesn't it?" Tolfmann said, right before he bit down on a piece of bread. Ludlov had to agree. It was such a humble community, surrounded by so much wilderness.
"There are many such small villages in areas like this. But usually the worst they have to worry about is wolves, not demon-worshipping cultists."
Well, I'm not overly fond of wolves, I will admit," Tolfmann said, once he had swallowed his bread. "But I don't fear these cultists."
"Good. Let them fear us instead."
"I know you're trying to brighten my mood," Tolfmann said, "but I mean it."
"I've known initiates who didn't fear evil. Their confidence did not always bring them good fortune."
"Didn't you just tell J.R.R. last night that he shouldn't listen to fear? That such emotions don't come from the goddess?" Tolfmann reminded him with a playful smile. Ludlov returned the smile heartily.
"It's not a contradiction, my young friend. All emotions exist for a reason. Fear has its place. If we didn't know it, we would become reckless and throw away our lives rashly. I didn't tell J.R.R. never to fear anything. How could I? One can't control such things."
Tolfmann stared into the horizon, as if he was expecting to see something important happen there. "It's true," he said. "You used the words anxiety and worry. I remember now."
"Indeed I did,"
Ludlov said.
"because those are the emotions that creep up when fear is allowed to fester. That's what I believe, at least."
"I suppose that's not a bad way to look at it," the initiate granted. Ludlov took some bread out of his own backpack and tore a humble piece from it. He wanted to ration his provisions carefully, not knowing how long they would be out here in the wild.
"You're from somewhere near the Pennsylvanian border, aren't you, Tolfmann? I thought I heard someone mention that back in Seven Peaks."
"I'm from the county of Drachenschild, that's right," said Tolfmann. "I was born in Ostfluss, but I had to leave. I can't go back."
"You don't have any family left?"
Ludlov asked carefully. "None," Tolfmann replied resolutely. "The Order is my family now. I'm sure you understand, Master."
"Better than you know."
"I know. About your wife, I mean."
"Yes, well, I'm sure you understand why I joined the Order then."
"I wasn't referring to her being murdered," Tolfmann said hurriedly, but then he lowered his voice as if someone might be listening in. "I was referring to her abilities." Jolted by those words, Ludlov swallowed his bite of bread and raised an eyebrow. "Her arcanic abilities," Tolfmann clarified boldly. Baffled, and more than a little disturbed, Ludlov found himself unable to react. All he managed to utter eventually was,
"How?"
Tolfmann shrugged. "You made it clear enough, whether you wanted to or not."
"I'm quite certain I never mentioned anything of the sort,"
Ludlov said defensively, but Tolfmann shook his head. "It's not anything you said that gave it away. It's nothing." He waved his hand. "Please forget I mentioned it." Then he bowed his head, as if he was ashamed of something. Ludlov didn't know what to say. "I apologize, Master Ludlov," Tolfmann went on. "I won't mention it again, certainly not in anyone else's company. I know some people within our order would be quick to judge." Ludlov knew he meant Vathek.
"Did Lord Adomir talk about any of this when you were doing research work for him?"
Ludlov asked.
"I know he's always been interested in evil cults, and he wants to find and eradicate the cult that killed Maria as much as I do."
In truth, Ludlov had come to believe that Lord Adomir had given up looking into the cult of the Black Sickle years ago, but he might be mistaken. Tolfmann kept quiet. Ludlov could see him think. "Curiosity is the shadow cast by the Tree of Knowledge," the Initiate quoted Adomir. Ludlov felt slightly outwitted by the Initiate. A part of him wanted to remind Tolfmann of his superior rank, to intimidate him into revealing his secrets, but he managed to resist that impulse, as tempting as it was.
"Forgive me. I'm only human, you don't have to tell me."
Tolfmann hardly seemed to have heard him, too lost in his own thoughts.
"Lord Adomir is a wise man, and like all the wisest of men, he keeps most of his knowledge to himself."
"His research didn't disclose anything about the cult that murdered your wife, Master Ludlov, as far as I know," Tolfmann said, his eyes still fixed on the landscape in front of them. Ludlov didn't respond, and Tolfmann went on. "I just want to put your mind at ease, since I know you will keep torturing yourself about it as long as you suspect he might have found some new information on the cult." Ludlov sighed awkwardly. He felt grateful, disappointed, relieved and surprised all at once.
"Thank you,"
he said earnestly, watching the Initiate until he turned his head to face him.
"The back of my mind is always preoccupied with the Black Sickle. I should not have pressed the matter. It's not relevant to our task in any case."
"Do you think the cult hiding in these woods is the same group that killed your wife, Master Ludlov?" Tolfmann dared to ask. "Is that why you were so curious about Lord Adomir's findings?" Ludlov shook his head, but he had to admit that there was a kernel of truth to it, even if he hadn't been aware of it himself.
"It can't be the Black Sickle. There's no reason why it would be."
He closed his backpack and got up.
"We should keep going if we want to reach that border soon."
As their journey continued, they had an increasing sense of going uphill, even as the trees began to huddle closer together once more. "Ludlov, you were a friend of Brynjar's, weren't you?" Tolfmann asked, as they were passing underneath the dark cover of a patch of enormous pines. A blanket of needles softened their steps as they walked, and there was a deep sense of quiet to the place that felt somehow similar to the forlorn sensation of a land covered in snow.
"I would have called him friend, yes,"
Ludlov said. "What about Svensson?" Tolfmann asked. "I know they came here together, and they were both Untronian, but I don't know anything about Svensson."
"They were cousins,"
Ludlov said.
"Svensson was stationed in Königsfluss for most of his witch hunter career, though, to keep an eye on the Untronian border. I've only met him once or twice."
"Oh, that explains why I didn't know much about him either," Tolfmann said. "It's a pity. I'd love to learn more about the Untronian Empire. Perhaps if we do find them, he can tell us about it." Ludlov's throat constricted when he heard Tolfmann's words. He wanted to believe that Brynjar and Svensson were still alive, but he couldn't. The witch hunter bit his lips in sorrow. He had sensed from the first mention of Brynjar's disappearance that he would never see him again. Suddenly, Ludlov found himself wishing he had come alone. He was convinced now that he wasn't here to save his friend, but to avenge his death. He couldn't explain his intuition, nor did he want to. He didn't even understand it himself. Their trek through the woods continued on as the sun began to sink towards the western horizon again, somewhere beyond the treetops and the cold grey sky. The day had been entirely uneventful, and yet Ludlov couldn't shake the feeling of being followed on the way. The witch hunter was on his guard the whole time, half expecting some crazy cultists to come jumping out of the bushes. In reality, the only breathing things they had encountered so far were a few deer, squirrels, and birds. The trees stood close to each other now, their branches weaving together to form a dark and impenetrable canopy. Ludlov suspected it would keep them dry if those clouds decided to release their contents upon them after all. Darkness slowly set in, and there was a smell in the air that reminded the witch hunter of caves and underground streams. "The physician said he expected heavy rains," Tolfmann said, as if he had somehow heard Ludlov's inner musings. "We've been fortunate so far, but I don't think it will stay that way. Dr. Grauwald even recommended the women to finish up all outdoor work in the morning and stay inside. It will be hard to find any tracks with so much rain. We better move on and pray to the goddess we'll be able to get back to Hübschdorf in time."
"I hadn't thought of that," Ludlov said. "I usually don't pay attention to weather forecasts. They've never made me change plans before."
"Well, from what I've heard, the good doctor is rarely wrong when it comes to such things," Tolfmann said. Ludlov was tired after a days-long, uneventful journey, but he still wasn't ready to settle down and make camp. Even without any visible path to guide them, they never doubted their course as they followed along a yellowish-brown carpet between the trees, always heading northwest, towards the cave where Weiss had lost the two Entronians. They came to a part of the woods that had slightly fewer trees, but more of the sort of rocky terrain they had come across around noon. Jagged formations of black stone stuck out of the uneven ground like rotting teeth, covered with slick moss and brown autumn foliage. There were fallen trees, leaving holes where they had been uprooted, which were now full of black rainwater. Lumps of dirt dangled from their roots, which stuck out like strands of hair. There was a damp, earthy smell, and a heaviness in the air. Suddenly, Ludlov held still. He tapped Tolfmann's shoulder and pointed. There was a cave ahead. Was this the place where Weiss had confronted the angry maceling? Ludlov and Tolfmann exchanged glances. They both knew they would have to communicate without words from now on. Ludlov gestured for Tolfmann to stay where he was and slowly moved in the direction of the cave entrance, careful to avoid making too much noise. As he approached the cave, he picked up a pungent scent. It was vaguely familiar. No sound emerged from the darkness, though. For all he knew, the place was abandoned. His boots barely left a mark as he snuck towards the entrance. Once or twice, he only just managed to avoid stepping on a twig. Once he was closer to the entrance, the smell had intensified into a horrid stench, and Ludlov knew what it was. Animal waste, albeit of a less familiar nature than horse droppings or cow dung. He was certain he had found the armored maceling's lair, but he didn't hear the animal at all. Surely, this had to be the cave Weiss had described. Then a whisper reached his ear.
Master Ludlov.
It was Tolfmann. Ludlov turned in his direction and noticed how the young initiate looked paler than usual. He stood still as a statue, looking Ludlov straight in the eye. But then his gaze slowly shifted to an area just east of the cave. Ludlov looked in that direction and saw nothing more than trees, rocks, and fallen leaves. One of the rocks was different from the others, though. It seemed more rounded, and it was of a lighter tone of grey than the others. Only then did Ludlov see the head beneath it. Eyes hidden behind long strands of shaggy fur, pointed ears sticking out to the sides, and long jagged tusks. Half of one tusk had broken off, which corroborated Weiss's story. The armoured maceling stood still, its heavy front paws slightly bent, slowly raising its pig-like snout to sniff the air. Patiently, the massive thing took a few steps towards them. Long claws emerged from its feet like a bear's. The creature was enormous, Ludlov realized, almost as tall as a horse and more than twice as wide. Its carapace looked like it couldn't be penetrated even by gunfire. The animal was headed straight for Ludlov, but its steps were slow and deliberate. Ludlov stared at Tolfmann, prepared to tell him to run. He would sacrifice himself for the initiate if he had to, just like Weiss had done for her witch hunters. Very slowly, Ludlov raised up his hands and held up his palms in a gesture of submission. The maceling came very close and raised its snout. Ludlov saw its nostrils dilate as it sniffed him up and down. There were some grunts and rumblings, and then the snout released a hot gust of breath that made the hair in front of the maceling's eyes flutter, revealing a set of tiny, glittering eyes. A smell that reminded him of rotten fruits and vegetables came tormenting his nose. Ludlov swallowed. The thing was too close. He wouldn't be able to draw his weapon in time if it should turn aggressive. There was a heavy thud as the maceling smashed its tail end into the ground. It sniffed again, then hit the forest floor a second time with its tail. Ludlov trembled. He wanted to dash out of the way, but his gut told him to stay still, and this time he would listen. The creature sniffed him once more. Then let out a bored grunt and slowly turned away from the witch hunter, heading for the cave entrance. As it moved away from him, Ludlov saw its tail and the enormous weapon at its end. It looked like a cannonball with spikes on it. He understood now how it could have shattered Weiss's femur so completely. What he could not understand was how this gentle herbivore could have been driven to such madness. It behaved like a docile farm animal. Ludlov could imagine children safely riding on its massive back. The armored maceling's tail disappeared into the darkness of the cave, and Ludlov let out a slow sigh of relief. The Red Circle. There was a faint drizzle, so light it barely made a sound, but the heavy clouds promised much more rain to come. The terrain changed as well, their path now leading down again into a thickly overgrown valley. A narrow footpath meandered northeast between thorny bushes and great oak trees. It hadn't been used in some time. "That rain's going to get worse," Tolfmann predicted in a worried voice. "Perhaps we should have stayed in the cave with the maceling." "Are you quite sure you would have preferred spending the night in that stench?" Ludlov asked. Before Tolfmann could answer, he added, "Besides, the animal was friendly because it came across us outside of its shelter. It might have reacted very differently if it had found us inside the cave." I still find it hard to believe that it would have attacked us, in all honesty, Tolfmann said.
But it did attack Weiss,
Ludlov reminded him. Perhaps they encountered another one, Tolfmann offered. A grumpier one. Ludlov shook his head.
Armored macelings are very rare. They spend weeks roaming the forest to look for a mate, and afterwards they go off on their own again. The males living their lives in solitude, the females caring for their young until they are old enough to leave the nest. No, I doubt there's another armored maceling to be found for many, many miles. Besides, it's missing a tusk.
Then I keep wondering what could have angered it so, Tolfmann said. Ludlov remained quiet. The drizzle eventually died out. The grey clouds still hung low over the forest, occasionally shrouding the highest trees in mist, but there was no more rain that day. They were deep in the valley now, where the ground was flat once more. The trees surrounding them were mostly birches. Their trunks were tall, thin, and silver-white, their branches adorned with bright yellow leaves. It would have been an even more glorious sight if the sun had been shining, Ludlov thought. He had to admit that he had rather been enjoying his trek through the woods so far. He had always thought of the second moon of autumn as the ideal month to enjoy a good walk and admire the beauty of the forest.
This reminds me of an old walking song, he told Tolfmann. We Wanderers, it's called. You know that?
Tolfmann stopped dead in his tracks, standing still as the trees themselves.
Tolfmann, did you see something?
The initiate stared ahead. There it is, Master, he said in a soft voice. Ludlov followed his gaze. In the distance, the birches gave way for beech trees, and the golden yellow of their leaves was suddenly replaced by bright red. It was the red of fresh blood. Taking a few steps ahead, Ludlov saw clearly now that he wasn't looking at tree leaves at all, but at hundreds, possibly thousands of red ribbons tied to the long, low-hanging branches of the trees.
The border.
The two of them were very slow and careful in their approach towards the line of beeches. Each tree had dozens of red ribbons drooping sadly from its branches. It stretched out in two directions, a crimson line drawn through the forest like the circles on Mistress Weiss's map. Whoever did this was insane, Tolfmann said, the awe in his voice unmistakable.
Well, they certainly were keen on drawing a clear border around their domain,
Ludlov said.
I wouldn't be surprised if the border itself was part of some demonic ritual.
Do you think we'll trigger some evil magic if we cross it? Tolfmann asked.
It's possible. But that will not deter us. Nothing will. This is why we came here.
Then Ludlov approached the closest tree. It felt as if the ribbons themselves were daring him to take the next step.
Cover me, Tolfmann,
Ludlov said in a subdued voice. They both loaded their pistols and then faced ahead. Ludlov kept his hand close to his weapon. Beyond the border of hanging ribbons, the forest seemed to go on just as it had. There were no rotting barks, blackened trunks, or twisted bare branches. The same pleasant autumn colors prevailed. The only difference being that the woods apparently became denser ahead, but that was hardly remarkable. And yet, Ludlov felt the same ominous dread he had experienced even back in Hübschdorf, but somehow stronger, deeper, and darker. It didn't come from the woods, but from something hiding within them, something that was taunting him, as if the very border itself was saying, "If you are a true witch hunter, you will take the next step." Perhaps Brynjar and Svensson had felt the exact same emotions when they had come here, he thought. It could very well be some form of psychomancy at work, even though he didn't feel the presence of magic, which all witch hunters were trained to recognize. It didn't matter. He had to go. He passed the border. A sense of finality was injected into his heart as soon as he left the ribbons behind his back. If he didn't fulfill his mission now, the repercussions would be terrible, and the hammer of vengeance would not just fall on him and Tolfmann, but on all the villagers of Hübschdorf. Garner and the guards, Fenna, Anna and Florian, Dr. Grauwald and his wife, perhaps even Mistress Weiss herself. Their fates all depended on the two men who had dared to come here. It was quiet. Not a leaf stirred as Ludlov scanned the area ahead. He trod softly, Tolfmann close behind. There was no more path here, but they continued in the same direction they had taken so far, northward, deeper into the Wildwood. They came upon a small clearing, where the branches of the surrounding trees wove together to form a leaky roof over the moist forest ground. Ludlov was startled by the nagging, penetratingly loud caws of 3 crows circling above his head. The witch hunter moved on cautiously, noticing a strange smell in the air. About 5 paces further, he halted and lifted his hand. Tolfmann immediately held still beside him. About 20 paces ahead of them, half buried amidst the fallen leaves, lay a black, furry shape. "A dead animal," Tolfmann whispered. Ludlov gingerly approached it. With each step, it became clearer what it was, and the witch hunter's fear was confirmed. It was a dead hoopshound. "Scharf." Ludlov knelt down next to Brynjar's deceased companion. It looked like the dog had died recently, since the corpse hadn't noticeably started to decompose. Ludlov quietly theorized that perhaps the cold nights had preserved the body a bit better than usual. He was no necrologist, but like all witch hunters, he had picked up some important notions of the field in his forensics training. Scharf's features were hard to distinguish, as darkness seemed to have suddenly crept into the forest without their noticing. Ludlov wondered what the time was, and whether it was normal for dusk to arrive so quickly. Again, he decided it didn't matter. "Better light the lanterns now, Tolfmann." Tolfmann nodded, but his gaze remained locked on the dead dog. There was a deeply troubled expression in his young face. "It seems so real now," the initiate said as he took his lantern from his backpack. "Brynjar and Svensson's demise, I mean." Ludlov furrowed his brow. "I know. This is not a good sign." When they had both managed to light their lanterns, they let them hover over the dead dog to take a good look. The corpse's dark eye glittered like a polished marble, still and unseeing. Ludlov wiped away some of the dead leaves to expose more of the body. Scharf's paws were soiled with a mixture of dirt and blood, so he must have been digging for something. A line of clotted blood was visible on his scalp. It looked like the wound had been inflicted by something relatively blunt, like a spade or an old woodcutter's axe. The slight curve in the line indicated the former. Either way, it didn't look like poor Scharf had suffered long before his death. Ludlov reached for the dog's collar. It was still around Scharf's neck, but the medallion of the Witch Hunter Order was missing. "Brynjar would never have left him like this," Tolfmann said in a dejected voice. "He and Svensson, they must have perished." "They could have been separated somehow," Ludlov said, the hope in his voice frail. "Maybe the dog was killed more recently. We cannot know for certain since we have no idea what we're up against." Ludlov tried to avoid a solid conclusion, but he felt Tolfmann's desperation creep into his own heart. The initiate used his boot to scrape away some of the leaves and dirt around the body, looking for more clues. Brooding over the meaning of their discovery, Ludlov paced around the clearing in a wide circle. As he did so, he suddenly became aware of the increased stench of dead meat, and it didn't seem to originate from Scharf. As he investigated the ground further on, he noticed some vague tracks in the soil, as if someone had dragged the dog's body out here to quickly get rid of it. Following the trail out of the clearing and into a patch of thick, twisting trees and gnarled roots, Ludlov had to be careful to avoid stumbling or slipping. Holding his lantern aloft, he arrived near a thick black oak. He knelt and put his lantern down beside him. Its light was weak, and night was truly falling now, but still he was certain he had seen something glisten between the tree's roots. Brushing aside some dirt and twigs with the back of his hand, the shining object was revealed to be a medallion. As he pulled it out of the earth and cleaned it with the back of his fingers, an engraving depicting a crown with 7 spikes greeted him. There was a vague smear of blood on it. He wiped it off and tucked it in his breast pocket. As he looked up, he thought he saw something between the trees ahead. It was a vague and momentary shimmer, like the reflection of a flash of lightning somewhere far away. It was gone in an instant. There was nothing more to be seen in that direction now than the woods. Ludlov shook his head. This place was starting to mess with his mind. He was beginning to imagine things. Having retrieved Scharf's collar medallion, Ludlov's persistence forced him to continue his search. He wondered whether there was anything of value that might have belonged to Brynjar himself. There had to be something he always carried with him, Ludlov mused. Then he knew. Brynjar had owned a ring with the seal of the Witch Hunter Order, casually referred to as a glory ring within the headquarters. It was a gift bestowed upon all witch hunters after 3 successful missions. Ludlov kept his own in one of the drawers of his nightstand in Seven Peaks. Fulcrin's ring was enough for him. Brynjar, on the other hand, had always worn his glory ring proudly. Hope and fear were at war in his heart as he searched the location, but he couldn't find any sign of the golden band nearby. He grunted in frustration, but then checked himself. At least they knew what had happened to Brynjar's dog. But why had the animal lost its medallion here? As he led the lantern's faint light around the tree roots, he saw a mound of dirt, similar to a molehill. Perhaps Scharf had been digging here and lost his medal by pushing too hard against the roots of the tree. If he wanted to know what lay buried here, he would have to dig with his bare hands. Not for the first time, Ludlov regretted leaving his gloves in the Hübschdorf stable. Fortunately, despite the cold nights, the afternoons had recently proven relatively mild for this season, and the evening air hadn't yet affected the temperature of the earth too much. He looked at the magical ring on his finger and pulled it off. He wrapped it in a handkerchief and tucked it in his breast pocket, next to Scharf's medallion. Ludlov hesitated for a second, unsure of what he would find, but then proceeded to stick his left hand into the recently burrowed earth, while he held up the lantern with his right. He moved his hand around in the dirt until he felt something soft and smooth. Touching the unknown substance was a revolting experience. With some effort, he pulled it out of the ground, trying to identify it with the help of his faint light. He almost gagged when he realized what was in his hands. These were unmistakably intestines, the trailing red mass covered in dirt. He was reminded of a story Chappelle had told him years ago. It had been a tale of extravagant bloodshed and ritual sacrifice. No story could have prepared his mind for a find like this, though. The mere foreknowledge that such practices actually existed hadn't made the sight or touch of its reality any more bearable. He dropped the viscera back between the tree roots. The cult's hiding place couldn't be far away. Some further clumsy digging with a broken branch revealed even more organs. He thought he recognized human kidneys and a liver, even some toes. Were these the remains of a failed experiment? Or rather, a successful one? Had the organs been carefully chosen and buried on this spot as part of some kind of ritual? All sorts of questions ran through his mind, but the one he least wanted to entertain hovered in the foreground. Were any of these parts Brynjar's or Svensson's? As he was trying to push the question away, Tolfmann's voice suddenly appeared right behind him, echoing his own thoughts. "Do you think these are from our brethren?"
I don't know.
"Shouldn't we..." Tolfmann stammered. "Shouldn't we confirm... we confirmed Scharf's death. Lady Hoskiv would want..."
I couldn't tell, based on this,"
Ludlov said, trying to hide his revulsion. Unwilling to touch the viscera, Tolfmann started poking the earth around their findings with his boot, occasionally shaking his head. Digging any further was unlikely to provide the answers. Ludlov was convinced that these were not the remains of a single person, but of several. Perhaps that was all they needed to know for now. He couldn't stomach any more of this, so he covered his gruesome discoveries with some fresh, moist dirt, using the sides of his boots. Then he dizzily took a step back and reached for a nearby tree for support, fighting back the urge to vomit. For a second, he relived the same dizzy step back from the bed where he had found his wife after she had been murdered. He tried to shut out the red haze of those memories, squeezing his eyes shut. He had to consciously steady his breath and think of this discovery solely in terms of their task at hand. It took some time, but eventually he managed to quiet his mind. Then he produced his canteen and a long piece of cloth from his backpack. He took a sip of water but kept himself in check. He would have preferred to drink it all. But instead, this time he decided to pour the rest of the water over his hands to clean them. It was hard to get all the blood off with only 2 hands. The Dugarim must reap a lot of benefits from having 4, he pondered, trying to distract himself from all the deeply concerning clues he had found. When the last drop of water fell from his hands onto the earth, he grabbed the piece of cloth. It was bright white, so it would be more visible even in the gathering dark. He tied it around a branch of the dreaded tree near eye level, so that he would be able to retrieve the spot more easily.
"I want to scout the area,"
he said, his voice more gruff than usual. "Amantha scouting?" Tolfmann asked.
"Yes." "Stay here, please, Tolfmann. I'll take a look."
Amantha scouting was a technique all initiates learned early in their training. It required starting from a specific spot such as the oak tree where the organs were buried, and then scouting the area directly around it in 4 loops, much like the leaves of the common red Amantha flower. Ludlov took care to pay particular attention to the smells in the air, as they might lead him to other burial spots. However, all his nostrils could pick up was dead leaves and earth. If only they had found Scharf alive, the dog could have been of great help. When Ludlov returned from the 4 loops, he hadn't found anything. "I don't think we'll find anything more here," Tolfmann said. "But if I may say so, Master, I don't think we should just move on from here yet either."
"Do you want to set up camp? There isn't much shelter or open space here,"
Ludlov said, but Tolfmann immediately shook his head. "I know it's dark and our lanterns will run out eventually, but I have some more lamp oil in my backpack, and I do believe we'll find something related to the Untronians if we widen our search a bit."
"One last round then, before we look for a place to rest?"
Ludlov suggested. "Yes, Master," Tolfmann said, "but in order to cut down our search and spare our lanterns, perhaps it's best if we split up. I could search the north and the east, and you the west and south, for example." Ludlov considered the initiate's idea.
Splitting up is rarely a good idea. We're in enemy territory, he said.
Do you think we're very close to the cult's lair? Tolfmann asked.
No,
Ludlov admitted reluctantly.
So far, Weiss's map has turned out to be right. That would suggest that the heart of the circle is still half a day's march off. I suppose our chances of being seen by these miscreants at this time of night are slim.
We have already crossed the border, Master, Tolfmann pressed. This spot gave us new information. We might as well take this opportunity to check the surroundings. Ludlov found himself disarmed by the initiate's eagerness.
Very well. We'll each do 2 amantha petals of half a mile long, but I'll take the north and the west. I saw something there earlier. You do the east and the south. We'll meet up here at the tree again.
Tolfmann smiled. Right away, Master, he said, and immediately he turned and began his search.
Tolfmann!
Ludlov called out, stopping the initiate before he disappeared between the trees.
Make certain your pistol is loaded. Just in case.
Yes, Master, Tolfmann shouted back. Then Ludlov turned and began his first loop towards the west. Driven to ruins. Ludlov made his way through the thicket, paying attention to every detail on the forest floor. So far, all he could see were roots, leaves, and the occasional mushroom. Nothing stirred in the woods beyond the falling leaf. Looking in the direction where he had noticed the strange shimmer before, he saw a vague, stagnant mist veiling the trees, and picked up the subtle smell of a campfire. He considered straying from his path and following that scent, but ultimately decided to put off investigating it until he and Tolfmann were reunited. And so he continued his reconnaissance, uncertain what to look out for. Since he hadn't noticed anything around him, he focused on the moist forest floor. There might be a hidden trapdoor or a nasty hole in the ground. Even after a thorough search, nothing interesting turned up. Eventually, he raised his head once more, rubbing the aching back of his neck. He had been looking down for so long he hadn't noticed what was approaching from all around him. Only now did he notice that the trees ahead were all shrouded by a silver-blue mist. It slithered between bushes and roots, slowly but surely crawling towards Ludlov, tendrils quietly questing like hungry snakes. He wondered whether this mist was even natural, so suddenly had it appeared. When he fruitlessly returned from his first amantha leaf around the oak with the white ribbon, the smell of the rotting flesh buried between the roots came torturing his nostrils once more. He sighed in disappointment. The mist thickened until it became almost impossible to see farther than 10 paces ahead. Surely this wasn't natural. The cultists had to be aware of their presence. Perhaps they had sent the mist to stop them from discovering anything, or perhaps to lead them further away from each other. He considered calling out Tolfmann's name, but something held him back. Ludlov cursed inwardly. He had been a fool. They should never have split up. He heard a strange, high-pitched cry echoing from somewhere to the northeast. It didn't sound human. Soon after came the harsh blast of a pistol shot. Tolfmann was in trouble. Immediately, Ludlov started to run towards the sound. As he crashed through the underbrush, crawled over roots and dashed across the wet forest floor, his environment kept changing as trees and bushes appeared and disappeared in the mist. All of a sudden, he held still. Eyes lit up ahead. Yellow, slanted, and fiercely bright. He counted 5 pairs of them, dancing in the gloomy mist. Vague shadows turned into darker and more solid shapes as they approached. They were wolves, emaciated predators, the fur on their backs bristling high, their white fangs glittering. time they had seen him. Ludlov took out his pistol and aimed it. The closest wolf approached, snarling and growling. It emerged out of the shroud of mist, dripping with hungry saliva. "Master!" Ludlov heard to his left. Ludlov shot the wolf, turned and immediately ran towards Tolfmann's voice, leaving a cloud of smoke behind him. When he heard the other wolves howling behind him, he truly longed for his miniature crossbow. "Tolfmann!" Ludlov cried out. He ran as fast as he could. Yellow eyes followed him from a distance. He couldn't tell how many. Ahead, he saw the warmer hue of a soft, hazy light in the mist. Tolfmann's lantern? All of a sudden, the young man's voice cried out in pain. Instantaneously, Ludlov moved towards his companion, hoping his deliberately jerky and unpredictable movements would keep the wolves from focusing their attack. He approached and saw his initiate standing with his back to a great tree, his lantern and rapier lying on the ground, his still smoking pistol tucked underneath his belt. Tolfmann was holding a branch wrapped in a piece of cloth, trying to keep 3 angry wolves at bay, which proved to have little efficiency. "Back! Back!" he cried out. There was more growling and snarling as the wolves slowly approached him in a pack, gazing at him as if he were the main course at a royal banquet. Ludlov suspected his initiate had dropped his lantern and was now hastily trying to construct an alternative. He tucked his pistol beneath his belt and took out his rapier and dagger, since he suspected the wolves were about to make this encounter very personal. Barely had the thought crossed his mind when a large wolf was upon him. Though it was clearly close to starvation, its hot breath spread the sickening odor of fresh blood. With a guttural growl, it jumped at Ludlov's neck. He distracted the beast with an ostentatious swing of his rapier's shiny blade as he skillfully planted the dagger in its neck. Foam bubbled from between its sharp fangs before the creature collapsed in a furry mass at Ludlov's feet. Tolfmann was closer now and still seemed to be using his dagger. He slashed it at another wolf, causing it to shrink back. The third of the predators had seen Ludlov and turned to face him. It pounced immediately, but Ludlov wheeled out of the way, letting the angry wolf pass him by. Then he turned and slashed its side with his rapier. The wolf whined in pain, but still it came back for revenge. Ludlov kicked it in the snout as it tried to bite him, but even then the voracious animal didn't give up, jumping towards him once more. Ludlov instinctively raised his rapier in defense as the wolf threw itself upon him in deranged fury. The blade slid deep into its furry hide. Ludlov fell to the ground, the dying wolf on top of him. He rolled over in the dirt, scrambled upright and slid his bloodied weapon out of the dead thing. He had barely managed to get up when he felt a painful scratch and a powerful tug as the next wolf bit into his trousers near one of his calves and tried to tear him back down. Despite his preoccupation with the animal, Ludlov picked up a distinct, determined whisper coming from his initiate's mouth. "Thia!" The torch in Tolfmann's hand was immediately set ablaze. Skillfully combining his torch and dagger, Tolfmann managed to subdue and slay another wolf, and was now keeping the remaining ones at bay.
"Back, you hellhounds! Be gone! Away!"
An anxious feeling overwhelmed Ludlov. The first thing he always tried to do in a fight was to determine how many enemies he had to deal with. While wolves weren't necessarily a great threat to a seasoned witch hunter, such an exceptionally angry and large pack could prove lethal, especially when they could take advantage of the cover provided by the trees. Ludlov had no idea how many there were. They might not even have killed half of them. A vicious growl behind his back made the witch hunter turn, and before he could decide what to do, he had kicked his heavy boot hard at the head of an enraged wolf. The famished-looking beast dropped between the moist autumn leaves. The pungent smells of blood and wet dog fur blended with the earthy forest scents. The animal might have been merely unconscious, but Ludlov didn't have time to check. He pulled back his arm just in time as another wolf snapped at his unprotected fingers. A powerful stroke of his blade landed on the beast's snout, drawing blood. The creature whinged in pain and withdrew. Unwilling to risk its return, Ludlov pressed the attack once more and plunged his weapon in the beast's throat, killing it instantly. Once Ludlov had slain all his lupine opponents, his eyes quickly scanned the environment for his initiates. Tolfmann had managed to kill the last wolf, at least by the looks of it, just as it had readied itself for a fatal attack. The young man stood there, panting and wide-eyed over its dead body. The torchlight in his hand revealed the glistening sweat on his face and cast large, nervously flickering shadows on the tree trunk behind him.
Good to see you, Initiate,
Ludlov said.
Well fought.
Then his gaze shifted to the flaming torch. Had he really heard what he had heard, and seen what he had seen?
There are surely more of them, Master,
Tolfmann said, dropping the torch and dousing it with some wet dirt.
Your lantern light will have to suffice for now.
The young man's words were immediately confirmed by the sound of howling in the distance.
Let's keep going,
Ludlov said.
Quickly! Come on!
Tolfmann picked up his lantern and rapier, and the two men rushed off. All they could think of was getting as far away from the wolves as possible. The strange mist that had so suddenly appeared slowly began to dissipate as they made their way further west and north. The howling spread out behind them as more lupine voices joined. But after a terrifying dash through the undergrowth, the eerie sounds began to seem a little bit more distant at least. They had to stop. Ludlov found himself panting like a dog on a hot day, his heart pounding in his throat. They didn't speak, but simply waited until they had caught their breath, then continued on in a steady march. Ludlov's heart was racing. They didn't know where they were or how they would return to the tree with the white ribbon. His legs hurt. They felt heavy and stiff. It seemed like he had been running around in these woods for months now. He was tempted to find a place to rest and sit out the darkness of night, but still they moved on. Driven by fear, Tolfmann seemed inexhaustible as well.
Mysterious mists, feral wolves. These are not your everyday cultists,
Ludlov said eventually.
They meant to drive us apart.
Tolfmann remained silent.
We're dealing with a force that has been menacing these woods for many years. It is time we put a stop to that.
I do not think we can stop them in this darkness,
Tolfmann said. Ludlov knew he was right. The initiate held up his damaged lantern. The glass was partially broken.
I'll have to find a way to fix this later,
he muttered to himself.
I think we ought to find a safe place to rest,
the witch hunter suggested.
How will we find our way back?
Tolfmann asked. Ludlov looked up, but there was absolutely nothing to see.
We'll need to wait for the stars to come out if we want to reorient.
They walked straight on, sticking close together, looking out for a good hiding spot. As they continued, the forest changed again. The mist was gone, and the trees were spread out a bit further apart. If only those clouds would part, Ludlov thought. Then, all of a sudden, they came upon a most surprising sight. Nestled between the scattered trees, bushes, and weeds stood the ruins of a small hamlet. About a dozen wooden houses, all dilapidated and overgrown, surrounded a mud-drenched square. There was a mossy brick well-house with an iron-barred gate in the exact center. At the far end of the square stood a stone chapel with a bell tower. Half of the archway of the front gate was missing, as was the door itself. The greater part of the ceiling had collapsed as well, and the right wall had several holes in it. Only the bell tower remained somewhat preserved, its integrity solely marred by several missing shingles and a hole in the pointed rooftop that revealed the broken remains of the skeletal wooden framework beneath. Instinctively drawn to the chapel, Ludlov made his way across the square and past the well until he reached the doorway. When he was about to enter the chapel, an uncomfortable feeling washed over him, like a sudden chill. He could tell he was being watched. He had experienced this sensation many times, especially since their arrival in Hübschdorf, but this time it was unusually intense and even more disturbing. Ludlov turned and looked around, his eyes stopping where the trees stood closer together, seemingly forming a protective border around the ruins. In an instant, he saw a shape. It looked pale and unnaturally skinny, but unmistakably humanoid at the same time. Ludlov frowned and focused, trying to get a better look at it in the darkness, but then he blinked and it was gone. Was his fatigue causing his eyes to play tricks on him? Then he noticed the leaves of the bush bouncing up and down, exactly where the creature or person had been standing. Tolfmann gave him a worried and questioning look as Ludlov stood there, frozen. "What is it, Master Ludlov?" he asked. Ludlov did not want to alarm his companion and slowly shook his head.
"I'm exhausted,"
he exclaimed.
"I suppose I haven't entirely shaken off those wolves yet."
"You're not alone, Master," the initiate replied as Ludlov entered the chapel. Tolfmann followed close behind. Ludlov's lantern cast a ghostly glare on the skeletal remains of the little hamlet. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, the witch hunter entered the building. Inside, he saw the remains of several pews and what looked like an altar. A lonely marble statue of Saint Wilhelm the White stood in the back. One of its hands was missing. After a brief search, Ludlov concluded there was not much else to see inside. When he left, he saw that Tolfmann had entered the well house and decided to join him. The round well had a firm-looking pulley attached to it, which Tolfmann was hoisting up all the way. The thick rope ended in a large, solid metal hook, but there was no water pail. Ludlov let his lantern hover over the gaping depths of the well and saw the shiny water surface stare back at him less than 6 feet below. He had no idea how deep the well was, but the rain showers of the past days had no doubt caused the water level to rise quickly. The smell of the well's stagnant contents reminded him of the Seven Peaks sewers. Suddenly, Ludlov realized he had been pushing a loose cobblestone with his elbow in his leaning. It came loose and tumbled down into the darkness with a big, reverberating splash. He thought he heard a strange shriek, amplified by the eerie echo of the shaft. There might be anything down that well. Rats, bats, some stray forest animal, even a bird. Tolfmann gave him an uneasy glance. They both left the well house in silence. The two men passed by most of the buildings. Some had almost been reduced to the skeletal remains of their wooden frameworks, overgrown by ivy and other plants, like cadavers left behind for scavengers. Others were heavily damaged, but at least still had walls, partial rooftops, and something that resembled a window or a door. A few were intact, but even those had been overgrown. There was one house with a simple wooden door which looked like it had been smeared with blood. Strands of hanging moss formed a strange archway above it, like a huge green moustache. There were scratches on the door that could only have been made by some wild animal, and several traces that indicated that wolves or other predators came here to play, mate, and eat their prey. Another nearby ruin consisted of little more than the knee-high remains of its cobblestone walls, but it still had an archway that held the door and a wooden panel with the word "Hunter" on it. Beyond it, standing on the remains of the wooden floorboards, Ludlov could see a large, surprisingly sturdy-looking wooden table that was in better condition than could be expected. The two men continued to amble along quietly, as Ludlov cast the lantern light on their surroundings. At the center of the ruins, close to the chapel and the well house, where there was a natural depression in the landscape, Ludlov turned slowly around to take it all in.
"I think I know where we are," he said softly.
Tolfmann gave him a curious look.
I think this is where our friend Garner grew up.
Thank you for listening to the 5th episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf, a witch hunter tale. We hope you smell the autumn leaves, the whiffs of midnight breezes, and feel the moisture of rain showers, the texture of the humid moss carpets on the tree trunks. Ah, that's what's so awesome about creating this. Especially with the support of our awesome patrons out there, including Amy and Dallas Austin, Dustin Garner, Antonio Padula, Peter Strandkrone, Cody H, Jogat Oer, Matt Petain, Cameron Brantley, Tony Ranico, Liam Gabriel, Mix and Match, Caitlin Bourgeois, Kadir Hussein, Yiji Dusht, Itamar Sturm, Gander, Osarion, Alu, Arno Teva, Ryan Stock, Jay, Rob Skinner, Tim the Gothic Horror Guy, Johnny White, and Sue Morrigan. We currently have 25 patrons, and we are really grateful for their support. They help us to stay motivated and to pay for expensive software licenses, music royalties, actual human cover artists, and they help us to keep all AI crap far away from us. If you enjoyed this episode and you're on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll know whenever a new video pops up. We also love your comments and try to respond to all of them while we still can. We hope you'll be here next Friday during our premiere of the 6th episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. If you're on Podbean, please share the link and don't miss episode 6. The next chapter is called Tolfmann's Secret. We'll be live in the chat during the premiere. Last week, Bob wrote, "You always make tough times easier to get through." We just wanted to say, that goes both ways, Bob. Y'all's enthusiasm is what gives us purpose and pulls us through our rough patches. So feel free to all join us in the live chat next week too. If you can't wait till Friday, you can purchase a story on Bandcamp or join us on Patreon in the Master Witch Hunter tier or higher to get hold of the extended edition. Or you can support us in other tiers from as little as $1 a month. That would be a mere $12 a year. It would mean the world to us, and Ronan really has his eye on that Lego General Grievous keychain, while Liam is fond of the Chewbacca. To check who of you diehards are still listening to our ramblings, write a word that rhymes with heart in the comments so we'll know who our most loyal or thorough fans are. And we hope to see you all again next week for episode 6. Bye!